morning. Apologies for being 2 minutes late. Today it is a pleasure to join with Representative Lynn Wacthmann to talk about an issue that's been near and dear to our hearts for several years, and it's in connection with the Great Lakes Compact. House Bill 416 of the 127th General Assembly, which is commonly referred to as the Great Lakes Compact, requires the enactment of an enabling legislation for the implementation of the compact in Ohio by 2013. As the Ohio Senate Majority appointee to the Compact Advisory Committee, I worked with then Director Sean Logan and 27 other members of the board on that board on recommendations for this enabling legislation. Today I am pleased to be joined by Representative Wacthmann as we announce the introduction of the Great Lakes Compact enabling legislation, which recognizes Northern Ohio's valuable fresh water as a job-creating economic asset, while still meeting Ohio's duty under the compact with respect to the management of the waters of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence River Basin. Consistent with Section 4.10.2 of the compact, the proposed legislation sets appropriate threshold levels for the regulation of new or increased withdrawals to assure an effective and efficient water management program that will make sure that uses are reasonable. The legislation recognizes Northern Ohio's freshwater assets as a valuable job creation piston in Ohio's economic engine, while at the same time provides for reasonable management of the waters of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence River Basin, which is the Lake Erie Basin in Ohio, so that the objectives of the compact will be achieved. What's important is that failure to pass enabling legislation will result in the automatic imposition of certain threshold levels for management and regulation of new and increased withdrawals of 100,000 gallons per day or greater average in any 90-day period. This is under the terms of the compact, so it's important that we do move forward and implement the compact with our own legislation in Ohio, because this automatic imposition would unreasonably restrict the availability and use of the waters in the Lake Erie Basin for the people of Ohio. This proposed legislation respects private property water rights consistent with the constitutional amendment that we successfully enacted to protect private water rights before the compact was passed. This proposed legislation will promote and encourage voluntary water consumption conservation practices, and I stress the word voluntary water conservation practices because that's what the compact provides, and establish a reasonable regulatory process that recognizes the value of fresh water as an asset for Northern Ohio to be both promoted and managed. Representative Wacthmann will lead this legislation through the Ohio House. I will work for passage in the Ohio Senate. Proper management will maximize fresh water as a valuable asset for Ohio's economic recovery and ensure the availability of that valuable asset in Northern Ohio for future generations. And I want to thank Brian Barger, who we'll hear from in a little bit, Jan Klein from the Chamber, and all those who worked so hard both on the board and in this process of trying to bring this legislation forward today. And at this time, I'd like to ask Representative Wacthmann to say a few words.
Thank you, Senator. Good morning. Thanks to all of you for coming out this morning. Implementing this legislation is critical so that we do not allow the feds to give us direction that, in my view, would be very negative towards future job opportunities and economic growth across Northern Ohio. I've had the privilege to grow up and be raised in the Maumee watershed, one of the main tributaries feeding the Lake Erie Basin, and the assets that we have in the way of water are vitally important, whether you're making engine blocks of Defiance at the GM plant, making soup in Napoleon. Water, the wise use of water is imperative. And we need to make sure via this legislation that we protect those assets as well as make sure we have good policy in place that will encourage economic growth and potential for job development. So again, we dare not be in action by not passing this implementing legislation. I look forward to long and thorough discussion, debate, and committee process. I appreciate all those who have been behind the scenes, been working for probably years to develop and craft this legislation, and look forward to working with the Senator and my colleagues in the House to move this agenda forward. just a couple other things. You have great fisheries, great natural resources, the boating, all those things are worth protecting. But again, we always need to balance that with our opportunities for job growth, because someday Arizona and Nevada and Southern California and those states, I mean, they are literally drying up, and we need to make sure that this is an asset we have as a development tool.
Thank you very much. At this point, I'd like to ask Brian to join us. Brian Barger is going to say a few words on behalf of the Coalition for Sustainable Water Management here in Ohio. Brian.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Representative. On behalf of the Coalition for Sustainable Water Management, I would like to thank Senator Grendell and Representative Wacthmann for their efforts in drafting this important piece of legislation. The coalition is comprised of the Ohio Chamber of Commerce, the Ohio Manufacturers Association, Ohio Chemistry Technology Council, Ohio Petroleum Association, the Ohio Aggregates and Industrial Minerals Association, the Ohio Soft Drink Association, and the Greater Cleveland Partnership. The coalition's member organizations have a very real interest in ensuring a sustainable supply of water to meet the needs of today's water users as well as the needs of water users for generations to come. As you may know, the Compact's overarching purpose is to prevent diversions of water to areas outside of the Great Lakes Basin. In addition, the Compact requires each Great Lakes state to adopt measures that regulate certain in-state withdrawals and uses of both surface and groundwater. While today, water withdrawals by Ohio businesses, as well as by the public at large, have not proven to be a problem in the Lake Erie watershed, this bill provides the Ohio Department of Natural Resources with tools to monitor potential impacts going forward. Notably and importantly, this bill does so in a manner that promotes the good stewardship of Ohio's water resources, protects existing private property rights, and promotes economic development and job creation in Ohio's hard-hit industrial corridor stretching from Ashtabula to Toledo by recognizing that an abundant supply of fresh water is a highly viable and valuable commodity. While the focus of the Compact is on the Great Lakes Basin considered as a whole, this bill's focus is on managing water withdrawals and uses to prevent unlikely adverse impacts to the Lake Erie watershed, particularly to the water level of Lake Erie. Importantly, and while not required by the Compact, this bill also provides enhanced protection to a number of small, high-quality streams by giving ODNR the authority to adopt rules to manage withdrawals from specific stream segments. In doing so, this bill not only lives up to the spirit of the Compact, but in this instance, even exceeds what is required by the letter of the law. In conclusion, we again thank Senator Grendell and Representative Wacthmann for sponsoring this important bill and its common sense approach to ensuring sustainable water supplies for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you all for coming out this morning. I did want to touch on a couple things. Representative Wacthmann pointed out the diversion issue. As you all may remember from the media, the Compact was sold primarily because it was going to prevent the diversion of the Great Lake water to China or Nevada or other places. That stays in place. This legislation deals with, as Mr. Barger said, the implementation requirements of the Compact. So there's absolutely will be no diversion of our water per the Compact, but we have to deal with two issues inside the Compact, inside Ohio. One was the issue of involuntary or voluntary conservation, and this supports the voluntary conservation concept. And the other part was the question of regulatory oversight of new and expanded withdrawals. And the key here was to make sure we protected the private property rights, the rights of our farmers in northern Ohio, and the rights to attract business, such as the GM expansion in Toledo, companies like Campbell's Soup. They're here in northern Ohio because they have access to an available water supply. And we want to make sure that while we're meeting the requirements of the Compact, we're not disadvantaging what I consider to be the greatest asset of Northeast Ohio and its people, which is the abundance of fresh water. And that's what we're going to do with this legislation. We have been working with ODNR. I had an opportunity actually to sit down with the governor yesterday and discuss this legislation directly with the governor and bring him up to speed with where we're going. I anticipate that we'll be working hand in hand with ODNR have the support of the governor as we bring this bill to the finish line. And last but not least, in the Senate, it does have a bill number. It's bill number SB 170. And we do have 10 sponsors on the bill. Senators, 11 counting me. Senators Seitz, Cafaro, Gilmore, Patton, LaRose, Wagner, Stewart, Manning, Height, and Jordan. And I'm particularly pleased that we have the senators from Ohio that have the lake in their district as co-sponsors on the legislation. So I look forward to working with Lynn as we bring this to fruition. And we didn't want to wait till 2012 to have this discussion. We felt that both meeting the requirements of the compact and also preserving our water resource for its job-creating economic value was important. We wanted to get in front and get this done, and so that's why we're looking forward to moving forward this time. And we're glad to answer any questions that you may have.
Senator here.